All right, everybody, welcome to the Arts Impact for Individuals Grant Information Workshop from the Metropolitan Regional Arts Council. My name is Masami Kawasato, and I'm a program director at Emrak, and I will be leading today's webinar. I'm one of the program directors working on this grant program, and I use she, her pronouns. My colleague, Jovan Revelar, is the other program director working on Arts Impact for Individuals, and she is here in this webinar with us. Jovan, if I could ask you to please drop the link to the PDF download of today's slides into the chat, I'd be so grateful. Please know that the PDF has been built with accessibility principles, including alt text for images. I will describe any visual elements allowed for this presentation as well. For example, this slide contains the Emrak logo, which says Metro Regional Arts Council in orange and gray lowercase railway fonts. Some housekeeping for today's webinar. Please keep your microphone muted for the presentation unless you are asked to unmute. If you have a choppy video connection, please try turning off your video to improve that. We are recording today's webinar, not panel orientation, and it will be shared online for your reference. You can also turn on or off live automated captioning using the CC button at the bottom of your screen. Let's talk about some norms for this virtual meeting. As we go through the presentation, we prefer that you use the chat feature to ask any questions that come up. Jovan will be keeping tabs on the chat as I present, and we will be taking pauses throughout the presentation to answer questions that have been asked in the chat. We ask that you focus on asking questions that may be relevant to others here in the webinar. If you have questions that are probably very specific to your own situation, please plan to connect with the program director at a later date, and I will have information on how to do that later on. It would be extra helpful if you can make your questions something we can track back on. Using the slide title is helpful. So for example, writing something like, on the virtual meeting norm slide, can you explain what you meant when you said Jovan would be keeping tabs on the chat? The agenda for today is as follows. We will start with a section about Emrak, and then we will move on to the Emrak grant application process. I will present an overview of the Arts Impact for Individuals grant program. Then we will delve into the application content. Afterwards, we will discuss briefly submitting applications and receiving grant awards, and close out with any additional questions you may have. I do anticipate that the workshop will last the full 90 minutes that we've reserved. This slide, called Emrak Staff, has small headshots of each staff member, a collection of headshots of 4 women and 1 man who are a variety of racial backgrounds, all smiling in front of a pale yellow brick wall. The program directors are listed along the top, and from left to right, they are myself, Masami, Jovan, and Scott. On the bottom row are 2 other staff members, our executive director, Kathy, and our director of administration, Becky. We have 3 staff members that will be joining Emrak this month. And in fact, 2 of them literally started this morning. So their photos do not show up on this slide, but they are here with us in the webinar. And they are Mireya Espino, Program Director, and Yang He. Welcome to Mireya and Yang. This slide is about the Minnesota State Arts Funding System. I will give a quick overview of that and how Emrak fits into it. This is a flow chart that runs from top to bottom with blue arrows in between each of the steps. Starting at the top with taxpayers of Minnesota. In 2008, our state passed the Clean Water, Land, and Legacy Amendment, which increased our sales taxes by 0.3% for 25 years. 19.75% of that goes into the Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund, and their logo for the Legacy Amendment is shown on the left. The funds then go to the Minnesota State Arts Board. They are a state agency, and you can think of them as our parent company, and their logo is to the right. You may be eligible at the Minnesota State Arts Board, so we encourage you to check that out as well. This slide is a continuation of the state arts funding system, and again runs top to bottom with blue arrows in between. Once the funds go to the Minnesota State Arts Board, they will keep 70% of that for their own grants and services, and that's demonstrated by the arrow pointing down to the left. The remaining 30% of funds is sent to the 11 regional arts councils shown by the arrow pointing towards the right. Emrak is one of those 11 regional arts councils, so we will receive a portion of that 30% for our grants and services this fiscal year. In our previous fiscal year, 2021, Emrak distributed around $4.3 million from these funding sources. This slide is entitled Emrak Region 11, and on the left, there is a map of Minnesota split up into 11 geographic regions. Highlighted on the right is Region 11, which is Emrak's geographic service region, the Twin Cities Metro, with counties Carver, Hennepin, Anoka, Ramsey, Washington, Dakota, and Scott, with areas of Minneapolis and St. Paul also delineated. I would like to acknowledge that this region serves as the traditional, ancestral, and contemporary lands of the Dakota and Ojibwe people. In the Arts Impact for Individuals grant program, please know that all applicants must reside within the 7-county region in order to be eligible for this grant program. And I will have more information on that in later slides. Emrak's mission is shown on this slide, and I will read this aloud. The Metropolitan Regional Arts Council improves arts access for communities in the 7-county metropolitan area through support to artists and organizations. Because please know that we are a 501c3 federal nonprofit, not a state agency, despite the fact that most of our funding comes from state sources. Because of this funding, it's vital that all projects that we fund serve Minnesotans. Emrak has 2 grant programs for individuals, and they are the Next Step Fund, which is up to $5,000 for the growth and stability of individual artists, which is generously funded by the McKnight Foundation. We also have new this fiscal year, Arts Impact for Individuals, which is up to $5,000 for projects led by BIPOC, disabled, and or LGBTQIA2+ individuals to create access to the arts for communities and or engage with communities through creative endeavors. Emrak also has grant programs for groups, and they are the Flexible Support Grant, which is up to $15,000 to support projects and programs led by groups and organizations creating access to the arts. New this fiscal year is Arts Impact for Groups, which is up to $10,000 to BIPOC, disability, and or LGBTQIA2+ led groups for projects and programs creating access to the arts. On the right of the slide, there is a white question mark in a black circle, which means it's time for our first Q&A. We'll open it up to questions about Emrak staff, the state arts funding system, Emrak's mission and region, and Emrak grant programs. Are there any questions from the chat?
Masami, I am currently not seeing any questions from the chat at this time.
Wonderful. Then I will move on with the presentation. Folks, please know you can put any questions in the chat along the way, and we will pause several times like this during this presentation to answer those. This slide is entitled Overview of the Application Process. It is a simple flow chart showing the application process as green arrows moving from one step to the next. And all of our grants programs follow this application process. The process starts with the applicants and Emrak staff. Applicants can choose to attend a grant workshop such as this, or engage with program directors for support, and I'll have more information on that coming up. You will then submit an application on our online grant interface by the deadline. After the deadline, Emrak staff will check in the applications to check for eligibility. At this time, you may hear from program directors. Next, moving to the right-hand column, applications from eligible individuals will be sent to our panel evaluators, who will have approximately a month to read, evaluate, and rate the applications. Once evaluation comments and ratings from panelists are collected, Emrak staff will then send those results to the Emrak board, who will in turn make a decision about the funding results. This slide is entitled Application Accessibility, and on the left is the international disability symbol, a person using a wheelchair. We request that all applicants apply online unless a disability prevents them from doing so. Please contact us to begin a conversation about how to make sure you have an equal opportunity to apply. For example, guidelines are available online for screen reader software and translation programs, and we can also provide other formats. Some solutions we have previously implemented include filling out an adapted form in Microsoft Word, providing verbal responses that Emrak will share via audio recording or transcriptions. To begin a conversation about how we can help, please contact Emrak staff to do so. Emrak also offers resources to you to work on your grant application. To the right of the screen is a screenshot of the grant resources webpage of the Emrak website with the green arrow pointing to the resources tab. On that resources tab, you will find templates, technical how-tos for the grant interface, links to find demographic information, and a glossary of terms. Program directors are also available to assist you with your application. If you have a brief question, reach out to me or Javon. Remember, though, that you may hear back from any program director or someone else on staff. If you have a more extensive question or need help that will require more than a couple sentences, you should fill out the meeting request form that is found on the Arts Impact for Individuals program page on our website. And that URL is emrak.org/grants/arts-impact-individuals. In a meeting with us, please know 2 types of meetings are available: discussing individual eligibility or project eligibility or project idea development, or after your grant proposal is written, you may request an application eligibility review. Contact of staff people working on this grant program. This is shown as a table, and I will read aloud this table from left to right. If you have general Emrak grant making process or technical assistance requests or questions, please contact Emrak at emrak.org or call us at 651-645-0402. Brief applications can be sent to either myself or to Javon. My email address is masami@emrak.org or phone number 651-523-6386, or please contact Javon. Javon's email is javon@emrak.org and her office number is 651-523-6381. If you need extended assistance on phone or Zoom, please use that application assistance meeting request that I discussed in the previous slide. This slide is entitled Art's Impact for Individuals Timeline and gives you the major dates associated with this grant program. It is shown in a table, and I will read aloud the table from left to right. Emrak's fiscal year runs from July through June, and the Arts Impact for Individuals deadline is Monday, October 4th, 2021, and you must submit your application by 11:59 p.m. on that day. We will let you know about awards, meaning whether you have received a grant or not, on December 22nd, 2021. Please know that in order for your project to be eligible, this project must take place between December 22nd, 2021 through June 30th of 2023. On this slide, there is a big red exclamation point with a red circle around it indicating this is an important disclaimer. Everything discussed today is in the guidelines, but we do not have time to recount everything that is in the guidelines during this webinar, so please read the guidelines. That said, it's our job as program directors to be experts in the guidelines, so again, please feel free to reach out to us for assistance. The program purpose of the Arts Impact for Individuals grant is to provide up to $5,000 for leading efforts to create access to the arts and/or engage with communities through artistic endeavors. Individuals must be BIPOC and/or LGBTQIA2+, and/or a person with a disability. Eligibility. Please know that staff will review your applications for eligibility. So please review the guidelines carefully. Staff may deem parts of your application or the entire application ineligible. And please pay attention to your email. We may contact you at any point after the deadline seeking necessary information. So it's super helpful if you keep an eye on that regularly. This slide is called Geographic Eligibility, and to the left, there is a map of Emrak's geographical region, which was also shown in an earlier slide. In order to be eligible for this grant program, you must have your primary address in Anoka, Carver, Dakota, Hennepin, Ramsey, Scott, or Washington County. And you must have resided in this region for the past 6 months prior to the deadline. And you must reside here during the project time period if you are awarded a grant. More information on individual eligibility. You must be at least 18 years old on the deadline day of October 4th, 2021. And you must identify as Black, Indigenous, and/or a person of color, or you must identify as a person with disabilities, and/or you must identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, intersex, asexual, agender, two-spirit. So ineligible individuals for this grant program would be people who reside outside of Emrak's 7-county region, people who are under the age of 18 on October 4th, 2021, and organizations and groups, because this is a grant program for individuals. We are on our second question and answer slide. And again, there is a white question mark in a black circle. We will pause here to take questions about the application process, application accessibility, resources, the timeline, and individual eligibility in this grant program. Are there any questions from the chat?
There are no questions at this time. If anybody has questions, you can put them in. It looks like we maybe just got one. If whoever has their audio on, if you could please mute and type your questions in. Thank you. Okay, let's see here. May a person request both kinds of review, eligibility, and application?
Yes. Absolutely. Given that you give yourself enough time to request both, and then in turn, staff also has the lead time to do so. And we would recommend that you do individual eligibility first and application eligibility second.
All right, there's another question here. Do MSAB grants make you ineligible?
No, not that I'm aware of. But do also check with MSAB on their rules about multiple sources of state funding. At Emrak, it does not.
That looks like the end of the questions from the chat at this time.
Excellent. Thank you, Siobhan. All right, now we will delve more specifically into the Arts Impact for Individuals grant program. This slide has been shown before. It's the program purpose slide. And again, the purpose of the program is to provide up to $5,000 for efforts to create access to the arts or engage with communities through artistic endeavors. Some application tips for you all. Please know that you will type your application into text boxes online. Within each of those text boxes, there is a maximum character count. The character counts include letters, numbers, spaces, and paragraph breaks. Please know there is no formatting, such as adding bold or italics in the boxes. Please do not include hyperlinks in these text fields. If you do, we will be telling our panelists to not click on any of them. So our best advice is do not include them to start with. Please know that the online grant interface will auto-save your work every few minutes, but you may wish to work in another document and copy and paste your answers into the boxes after they are complete. And the bottom of the application template also has a save button. Please know that we have application templates available as downloadable Word documents, and you will find that on the Arts Impact for Individuals website. As I mentioned previously, these applications will be reviewed by peer panelists. So these next two slides are about what panelists will see from your application and what panelists will not see from your application. To that end, on this slide called Application Components Seen by Panel, there is a green icon of a human eye. The panelists will be able to see your individual's purpose, project, program name and description, your project and program section, your community section, your proposal budgets, and your pronouns. This slide is about application components that are not seen by the panel, and it has that same green eye from the previous slide, but with a black line through it. Please keep in mind, because none of this will be seen by a panel, it will not be part of their review. And it's still important to pay attention to these fields and answer them honestly. So the panelists will not see start and end dates of your projects, the outcomes proposed, your evaluation plan, and data for reporting, which includes, for example, participant numbers for the program or project that you are seeking funding for. This slide is called Proposal Narrative, and the narrative is your primary tool for panelists to learn about you and your artistic work. I've included the components of the narrative here, and those are individual purpose. You have 1,500 maximum characters for that. Your project and program name, 100 maximum characters. Project and program description, 200 characters. Project or program, 3,000 characters maximum. Community, also 3,000 characters maximum. And your proposal budgets, which are an expense budget and an income budget, both of which will have a 1,000 character maximum count. I will note that the character limit is the maximum characters. You do not need to fill that entire text box if you don't need it, but I encourage you to make sure that you have fully answered each question posed within these sections. For some people, such as people who have simpler projects, you may find that you do not need to use all of that space, and that is totally okay, as long as panelists can get the information that they need to make decisions and ratings and comments. And I will explain each of these sections right now. Individual purpose. Again, this is 1,500 characters max, and please consider numbering your responses as you respond to these two questions in the text box. What are your goals or intentions related to your artistic practice and or your work in the community? Number 2, in general, what kind of arts program do you plan to produce or have you produced? Moving on to project or program name and description. For the project or program name, you will have 100 characters max to describe in a few words what is the name or title of your project or program. And then in program or project description, you will have 200 maximum characters to provide a very brief 1 to 2 sentence summary of your project, beginning with the phrase funding to or funding for. We ask that you use the phrase funding to or funding for. If you do not, please be aware that Emrak staff may reword your response here to match that. In the project or program section, for which you will have 3,000 maximum characters, and again, please consider numbering your responses. Please answer the following 4 questions. Number 1, describe the project or program for which you seek funding. Number 2, what are the goals of this project or program? Number 3, in what ways does this project or program align with or advance your goals? Number 4, what are the activities that will take place? Where will the activities take place? Please describe major activities or tasks that take place between the start and end dates of your project or program. So a little bit more about what a project or program could be. It could be a first-time event or activity that you have never produced before. It could be a recurring, annual, or seasonal event that you have produced before. Please know that all projects and arts impact for individuals must have a community component, such as an informal talk, workshop, public performance, or exhibition, any of which may be presented virtually. What's also important in figuring out if the project is the right fit to make an impact on your community's access to the arts is that the activities clearly fall within the eligible funding period of December 2021 through June 2023. Moving on to the community component of your narrative. You will have 3,000 maximum characters to answer the following 3 questions. Number 1, describe the people your project or program benefits and your relationship with these people. 2, describe the connection between this project or program and how it will benefit the people previously described in question 1. 3, who are the people working on the project or program? Describe their roles within the project or program. How are they aligned to the project or program goals? You will also submit project budgets as part of your application. Project budgets are the picture of the financial aspects of the project, especially how you plan on spending the grant award. Budgets are where we see many eligibility issues, and what I present now is an overview. And in the guidelines, there's a lot more information and guidance along with sample budgets, which we hope will help you avoid eligibility issues. Please be aware that in-kind items, scholarships, and ineligible expenses should not be included in either budget. Keep in mind, budgets must match, meaning your total expenses and your total income must be the same exact number. To that end, staff will tabulate both of those fields, so please double check all of your math. And there are sample budgets and checklists in the guidelines, and we find that all projects fall under one of 2 funding scenarios. The first is Emrak is the only funding source for your project or program, and the second is Emrak is one of multiple funding sources for the project or program. The sample budgets address both of these scenarios.
Masami?
Yes.
I hate to interrupt. We have got a request for accessibility purposes. If you would mind turning on your video so that we can spotlight you as well, so that you can be seen. Okay.
Just a second. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you.
All right. Did that video share and spotlighting work?
Not yet, but I'm going to try to spotlight you as well. Add spotlight. Okay, there we go. It's working now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, specifically about project budget expenses, you will have 1,000 characters in this section. We ask that you list the major cash expenses of your proposal with dollar amounts and short descriptions. Again, please do not include in-kind expenses or other ineligible expenses. Your project budget may be larger than the amount requested in this grant program. You will sum up all the items in project budget expense, and that will be your response for total project cash expenses. Think about your project budget expense as your spending plan on how you will spend the grant funds. More on project budget expenses. Here are some examples of eligible expenses: to pay contracted artists, for administrative and other personnel, for professional fees or consultants, to purchase supplies for your project or program, space rental, venue fees or equipment rental, accessibility related costs. We recommend you be specific about what those are. Venue expenses, administrative overhead. Again, we recommend you be specific about what kind of administrative overhead. And you may also request funds for equipment purchases. Please be aware that you may request up to 25% of the amount requested for your grant award for equipment purchases. Again, please carefully review the project eligibility and ineligible projects and ineligible section of the guidelines. Including ineligible expenses may affect the amount of funds you receive from us or deem your entire application ineligible. Moving on to project budget income, for which you will have 1,000 maximum characters, we ask that you list the major cash income sources with dollar amounts and short descriptions. Again, there's going to be two funding scenarios here, that we are the only funding source for the project or program. And if that's the case, you're going to put in the amount of money that you're requesting from us, followed by Emrak Arts Impact or Individuals grant. If Emrak is one of multiple funding sources for the project or program, you will put in the amount of funds you're asking of Emrak as Emrak Arts Impact for Individuals grant, and list all other additional sources of income for your project. Examples of other sources of income, should you have a project that is funded by multiple sources, might be ticket sales, admission fees, tuition fees, a pay for live stream fee, a workshop fee, potential rental income fees, individual donations, or you may have other grants or sponsorships from other funding organizations. A reminder that the income budget must exactly match the expense budget, meaning total income must be the exact same number as total expense. This slide is entitled Springboard for the Arts, and hopefully the video will play successfully. On the screen, there is an image of Adia Morris-Swanger of Springboard, a Black woman with her hair pulled back, wearing white glasses, sitting on a brown couch with the Springboard for the Arts sign behind her. And I will now play this video. It is a 90-second video.
Hi, I'm Adia Morris-Swanger, and I'm the Program Manager of Professional Development for Springboard for the Arts. Springboard is an artist economic development and resource organization based in St. Paul, Minnesota, though we work with artists all over the country. Emrak asked Springboard here to make sure you're considering the broader tax implications of receiving an individual artist grant. As you're creating a budget for your grant proposal, make sure you include taxes in your expenses. If you receive the grant, which would be awesome, you'd be receiving a large chunk of what the IRS considers income. So you'll want to make sure that either A, you've set aside some money to cover that tax bill at the end of the year. 25 to 30% is a ballpark estimate for how much you need to set aside, though disclaimer, I'm not a tax attorney, so please take that as guidance. Or B, take the steps to set yourself up as a registered business so you can keep good records of your income and expenses in a separate checking account and under an employer identification number, or EIN. If all of this is brand new to you, you can get in touch with us at Springboard for the Arts for the broad topics, or request an attorney referral through the Minnesota Lawyers for the Arts program, MNLA, for more specific tax questions. You can also email me at Adia, ADIA, at springboardforthearts.org, or Andy, Artist Resources Director, at Andy, ANDY, at springboardforthearts.org for more guidance. Good luck.
All right, folks, on the slide is that white question mark in a black circle, which means it's time for a Q&A again. We're about halfway through the presentation. And I'm happy for us to take a longer 5-minute break here after this Q&A if participants wish. But at this time, are there any questions about program purpose, the application components, the narrative, or the project budgets? Oh, you know what? We are going to take like a 5-minute break after this Q&A. Never mind. but please feel free to ask your questions.
All right, we have a question in the chat. I was told long ago that if we set ourselves up as a registered business, we would be ineligible for Emrak grants. No longer true?
That is an excellent question. This grant program is for individuals, so setting yourself up as like a group business may lead to that. Joanne, what would you say here?
I would say that we should get back to you. I remember we did discuss this, if S corps are eligible. LLCs are currently eligible in our other grant programs. That has changed. So if it is a single member LLC, I can foresee that being eligible, but we will just circle back with you and make sure that we perhaps send that in like a newsletter or something like that. Does that sound right, Masami?
I like this plan. Let's go with it.
All right, another question. Let's see, S Corp, our usual, yes, of course. Okay, another question. Since the identity responses are not being made available to the reviewers, are we expected to also mention this in the other areas of the application?
We're going to leave that up to you. It is not required that you specifically state your identities in any of the narrative fields. And if you feel comfortable sharing that information and you feel that the panelists will benefit from having that information, please consider doing so.
And the follow-up to that was, if the verification of eligibility is not done by the reviewers, I'd rather use the space to describe the project. That's correct. Emrak staff will verify eligibility. Another question was going to start a podcast, poetry, music, arts related, and had a co-host. Does that count as a group project?
I think this is likely eligible as an individual project because, you know, we expect, or not expect, but it is totally normal for individuals to seek assistance, help, input from others to lead your art endeavor. So I think that sounds okay, but I would maybe like to know a little bit more of the specifics, and I might recommend that you do a eligibility review or application review to make sure.
An additional question. This goes back to the question about identity, it looks like. But it could be that your identity is tied to the project in some way, in which case that might help your project, correct? In that case, is it okay to share the information in your project narrative?
Yes, you are allowed to share your identity information in the narrative if you wish. You are not required to share it in the narrative. However, in order to be eligible, you please answer the identity questions that are not shown to panel, because if you choose not to disclose any of them, you are likely not, we would not know then if you're eligible for this grant program. So in the narrative, we're going to leave that up to you.
Looks like there are a couple more questions. I wonder, oh, okay, I see there's part one here. So from Rebecca, would a project that has gotten funding in the past from an organizational project or an organizational grant still qualify if most of the ideation, execution, and coordination is done or led by one person?
That's an it depends question. And please know that the next section coming up is all about ineligible projects and expenses, and also what to do if you have another Emrak grant for the same or similar project. So we will delve into that in the next section. So if that question remains then, would you please bring it up again at that time?
And that looks like it on questions from the chat.
All right, folks, let's take a brief break right now. I'm gonna say like 3 minutes and start back at 12:55. Does that sound all right to everybody? And after the break, we will talk about ineligible projects and expenses and hopefully answer Rebecca's question. And we will talk about the panel review criteria and the scale they use to do so. and we will talk about submitting a grant and receiving a grant. Sounds good? All right, y'all, let's take a mini break. For the next couple minutes, I will start again at 12:55, but now that it's 12:53, maybe 12:56. Thank you. Hello, folks. I'm going to restart the webinar. And I will switch to the next slide now. Oops. I am now going to have a bunch of slides about ineligible project activities and expenses. All of these slides will have big red X's in them to reinforce all the super not fun rules we have to enforce eligibility as we read through your applications. So even though these slides aren't the most fun, we thought we'd show you different kinds of red X's on every one in an attempt to make these as tolerable as possible. So in this first slide, there's a pretty straightforward red X made up of two equally thin and precise strokes with rounded ends, kind of like two breadsticks crossing each other over a bowl of spaghetti. So the following projects and expenses are ineligible. Projects that are not legally compliant, meaning not upholding laws or attempting to influence legislation. Projects that are for religious socialization of participants or audience, or projects that discriminate against person or groups. You may not have a project that takes place outside of Minnesota. Activities outside of the state are not eligible. Travel expenses to or from Minnesota are also ineligible, but you can engage an out-of-state artist or consultant. Please just do not include travel expenses to or from Minnesota in your project budget expense. Costs for relocating your address or residence out of the state is not eligible. This is a continuation of ineligible projects, and this red X is a little bit more casual, slanted to one side and rendered in broad strokes like it was made by a paintbrush. Projects and expenses outside of the eligible funding period are ineligible. This point is important because we do see a number of eligibility issues with this in applications. So when applicants get these wrong, they often have their grant amount reduced or the entire application becomes ineligible. So please pay attention to this point. Emrak grants cannot be used for reimbursement. All expenses included in the grant proposal must be incurred within the eligible funding period listed for each grant round. An incurred expense are those that are confirmed debts and or firm promises to pay, whether or not cash has changed hands. So, for example, performing artist fees may be an incurred expense at the time a contract is signed, even if the payment happens after that. More on ineligible expenses, and this red X brings us back to a more formal composition. It is thick and squared off in the ends in a severe, almost in a severe quality. Turned on its side, it would look like the logo for the American Red Cross. The proposal start date you entered in the application is the date on which you will begin incurring expenses for your grant. The earliest eligible proposal start date is December 22nd, 2021, and the latest eligible proposal start date is June 30th, 2022. The latest proposal end date is June 30th, 2023. So that means that the longest your project could take is from December 22nd, 2021 to June 30th, 2023. It can be any amount of time in between those two dates. Further ineligible project activities, and this red X builds on the last one, the same kind of severe blocky X, now contained within a thinner red circle. Projects that are managed by another entity other than the individual are ineligible. Project designed to raise funds, re-grant funds, or donate funds to another entity are not eligible. Please do not substitute other state dollars. For example, if you have an arts education project in schools, we recommend you review this section of the guidelines carefully. Capital projects and facility and residential improvements are not eligible in this grant program. Moving on to specific ineligible budget items, and this X really changes it up now. Instead of a red X in a white background, it's a white X in a red circular background, a fun inversion of what we have seen before. Please do not include unrealized income such as scholarships or in-kind costs, the purchase of real estate property, the purchase of alcoholic beverages, or any associated costs such as servers or insurance inclusive of alcohol. Development of endowments, debt reduction, and building cash reserves and savings. These are all ineligible budget items. With equipment purchases, you may request up to 25% of the grant amount for equipment purchases that are directly related to and necessary for the specific project or program. So again, only up to 25% for that. A little bit more information on specific ineligible budget items. And this red X is made up of 2 thin pencil-like strokes. All right. And I think this goes back to the previous question we had before. So expenses included in another Emrak grant are always ineligible. So that means if you include an expense item that is already covered by another Emrak grant or has already been requested in another pending Emrak application, your application or that budget item is likely going to be deemed ineligible. Okay, so we can only fund a budget item once through one grant program. This is particularly important for those of you who are affiliated with a group that received a previous Emrak grant or recently submitted an Emrak grant. Again, do not request those same expenses in this grant program. And a little bit more about that in the slide entitled Active Grants and Pending Applications. And this red X is a woodblock-like serif font made up of horizontal lines with heavier lines on the left and lighter lines on the right. Thanks for hearing our various description of red X's along the way. All right, again, this is more specific towards those of you who have submitted or received other Emrak grants. Okay. So arts impact for individuals may not supplement a project or program that has an awarded or pending Emrak grant. So if you have a fiscal year 2021 or previous grant from Emrak, as long as you are applying for a different project than that, it should be an eligible project. If you have already submitted a grant in FY 2022 or are planning to submit a different grant in this fiscal year, it will be eligible as long as they are all requesting different funding. I encourage those of you in this situation to refer to the already have another Emrak grant award or will submit another grant award section of the guidelines. We are up to another Q&A session again, and that white question mark in a black circle appears. Are there questions about ineligible projects and expenses or active or pending applications to Emrak?
There was a question from Basil. I can't quite answer it. It just says, doesn't the first bullet contradict the earlier suggestion about a registered business? Can you be more clear about which bullet point you're talking about, or did that question later get answered? Oh, the question is several slides back. Do you mind? Okay.
Tell me when to stop.
Is this it? That's this one. Okay. So the first bullet point, managed by another entity other than the individual. No, that does not contradict if we're talking about somebody registering a sole proprietorship. That would be their own company. So that would be managed by them still.
I agree with Jovan.
Let's see, what is the exact definition being used? Can you, I'm not sure what you mean. And just to be clear, the information about the registered business, that specifically has to do with tax advice from Springboard. It is not related to our grant programs or our eligibility, we will look to see if we can allow sole proprietorships to apply, but anything else related to a registered business, that is not what this grant program was designed for. It is specifically designed for individuals to have the opportunity to apply for funds to present, host, create access to arts, events, or activities within community. So that's the focus of this webinar, and I want to make sure that there's time for questions related to that. So anything related to business structures, I would direct to Springboard. We are not qualified to answer those questions.
Agree. Are there additional questions about these two sections?
There are. Let me just get back to
figured there would
here.
be.
Yeah. Let's see, there was a question that I did answer from Rosa about eligibility of space. Let's see here. Specific ineligible budget. For example, can we ask for space rental more than once? I did say that you can ask for space rental for multiple times as long as that space has not been funded through another Emrak grant. And I would also add is not proposed in another Emrak grant.
And as long as it falls within that eligible incurred spending period, as long as I think all of those are met, it should be okay.
All right, there is a question about equipment. If disabled need equipment, can it go over 25%? I guess that's related to capital purchases.
Currently, the rule is maximum 25% of the grant award can be used for equipment purchase. And I think we are going to ask that everybody remain there. So if your equipment purchase is, yeah, the current rule is up to 25%. And I will take this back to our team to discuss further. That's a great question, actually.
Any other questions from the chat? I'm not seeing any new ones. If I missed it, you can type in. Let's see. Thank you. 25 of 5,000. Yes, 25% of the 5,000.
So that's assuming you're requesting $5,000, right? Not everyone's going to request the maximum $5,000 grant award. So it's 25% of the grant award. So for example, if you have a project whose total expenses are $4,000, you can't request more than $4,000 from us. Then the 25% cap would be 1,000 of the 4,000. So it's 25% of how much you're requesting from us. Assuming you're going to go with 5,000, it's going to be $1,250. If it's lower, please do the math. Does that make sense, y'all?
Yes, that makes sense.
All right. Any additional questions? And there will be one final Q&A after this next section. And so that also means we are gearing up towards the end of this presentation.
Looks like that is it from the chat at this moment.
Thank you. Folks, this slide is entitled Review Criteria. And on the right, there is a circle split into 3 equal sections with arrows pointing in both directions between each section. The sections are labeled Individual Project and Goals, Project Design, and Relationships. So the criteria are the lens through which our review panelists are asked to focus their review of your application. You can download this panel rating guide on the Arts Impact for Individuals programs page, which outlines the rating scale that will be used to review your application. You may find that a helpful tool as you craft your application. Emrak believes that stronger applications demonstrate that an individual has clear goals, an effective project design, and the necessary relationships to make the work meaningful to the community. Therefore, the review criteria are individual and project goals, project design, and relationships. A highly rated application from the panel will clearly demonstrate how each criterion informs and aligns with the other two criteria. The panel will apply all three criteria to the application as a whole. For example, there might be information in your budgets that supports the strength of the project design criterion. The slide panel review scale for each criterion shows a 1 through 5 rating scale along a horizontal orange arrow indicating a spectrum. Panelists will review all applications online through the online grant portal, the same exact portal that you will use to apply with, and individually score each application assigned to them. Panelists will rate each criterion from 1 to 5, where 5 is the top score. Panelists are asked to use the full scale as they rate applications. Criteria ratings are combined for a total application score of 3 to 15. Scores are then averaged across panelists for a final rating. We ask the panel to think about their scoring like this. At the top of the scale, a 5, that the criterion is addressed with robust specificity and intention, clear alignment with other criteria. At the bottom of scale, at a 1, the criterion is not addressed or is significantly misaligned with other criteria. In the middle, a 3, the criterion is addressed vaguely or generically, and there is an unclear or questionable alignment with other criteria. So a 2 is somewhere between the bottom and the middle, and a 4 is somewhere between the middle and the top. Panelists will be required to write at least 1 comment about their feedback and reasoning for their number ratings. We specifically direct panelists to look for the content within each of your applications, not how eloquently words are written. This is an important equity issue, as applicants should not be scored lower because, for example, English is a learned language, or because they have a reading disorder such as dyslexia. You may find it helpful to get a friend or colleague who is less familiar with your arts background or arts project to review your application with this rating guide, which is available for download on the Arts Impact for Individuals webpage. This is the rating guide and questions asked for the criterion individual and project goals. The rating scale with the orange arrow is shown on the left. And within this criterion, we ask the panelists the following. To what extent do you agree with the following? That the individual has described specific goals and intentions overall that create or contribute to their capacity to create access to the arts. That the individual's vision for how they produce arts activities is relevant to the interests and needs of the community it is intended to benefit. That the individual has made a compelling case for why the proposed project aligns with or advances their goals or intentions. The rating guide for the criterion project design, again, shows the rating scale with the orange arrow to the left. And within this criterion, we ask the panelists, to what extent do you agree with the following? That the project details are thoroughly considered and the scope is appropriate. that activities will effectively produce the intended outcomes, that the project's design will create or contribute to the individual's capacity to create meaningful access to the arts that is inclusive and accessible to community members marginalized because of race, disability, and other kinds of oppression. The rating guide for the relationship criteria, again, shows the rating scale with the orange arrow to the left. And within this criterion, we ask the panelists, to what extent do you agree with the following? That the individual has clearly defined a community or communities that will benefit from the project or program. Who is in this community, who is served in or by this community. That the project described is specifically designed to benefit this community and has well-defined methods of reaching intended community members and meeting their needs. That the individual has demonstrated that people working on the project authentically reflect and are positioned to serve this community. Moving on to submitting your application, please be aware of our deadline. Again, that is October 4th, and you must submit your application by 11:59 on the deadline day. If you do not have access to a computer or internet, please contact us well before the deadline and we can potentially help you out with that. Please be aware that staff assistance is available until 5 p.m. on deadline day. So on October 4th, everybody at Emrak is going to turn off their computers at 5 and not check email, not look at voicemail until the next day. So if you need any assistance, please contact us by 5 o'clock on October 4th. Please register and use an active email address that you check often. Communications from us will happen through that email address. Keep in mind that we might contact you at any point from the deadline to that final decision date in December with questions or requests for potentially more information. This slide is entitled Emrak Grant Interface, and on the right is a screenshot of the homepage at emrak.org. There are 3 yellow buttons with a green arrow pointing to the button labeled Manage My Individual Artist Grant. And that is the exact button I want you all to press to access the Emrak Grant Interface and the application for Arts Impact for Individuals. Please just use one account per individual. You're going to use an email address as your login. So please use, your own individual email address, not one that is organizational in nature. If you have previously applied for the Next Step Fund grant program, you already have an account there. So if that's the case, use those credentials to log in. If you cannot find those, get in touch with us and staff can help reset your password. And if you receive a grant award, which would be really exciting, demonstrated by the image of fireworks shown on the right of the screen, please know that we will ask you to sign a grant agreement and upload an individual W-9 that is dated within this fiscal year. So that W-9 must be dated between July 1, 2021 and June 30th, 2022. We will issue the check, the grant check, in your name, and you will receive a 1099 from us. As Adia mentioned in the Springboard video, the grant award may affect your individual taxes. If you receive this grant, you are required to acknowledge Emrak and the Legacy Amendment using logos that were previously shown in this presentation, along with language in your promotional materials, such as flyers or on a website. If you have project changes to your proposed projects, please communicate those with us in advance of instituting that project change. And if you receive a grant, you will be required to submit a final report 2 months after your end date that will ask you about outcomes, your evaluations, and how you ended up actually spending the grant award. Folks, this is the last slide in this presentation, so I will open it up to any additional final questions. Keep in mind, you can go to the Arts Impact for Individuals website to request a one-on-one meeting or phone call with one of the program directors. If you are new to Emrak, please consider visiting emrak.org/grants. We have a welcome to Emrak grants and other information on grant programs there. With that, I am going to stop my screen share and answer any additional final questions. Meaning, if you don't have any, thank you so much for being here. I hope this was helpful for y'all. And do not hesitate to get in touch with us with questions you might have. And for those of you who have questions, please stay and feel free to ask them now.
There is a question in the chat. It says, at the beginning, you mentioned that there's an organizational counterpart to this grant. I don't see this anywhere on the Emrak website, nor can I find any information on it. Where do I find this?
You are absolutely correct that there is no information on the Emrak website right now. And I promise that is forthcoming soon. As I previously also mentioned, we have new staff as well. Here's what I can tell you right now. The deadline for Arts Impact for groups will be February 7th, 2022. And we will put the application materials and on our website shortly. I would recommend that you sign up for our monthly emails because then you are guaranteed to get an announcement about that grant program.
There was a question earlier in the chat that I did answer, but I'll just say it out loud for the sake of the recording. Someone asked about how many panelists review each application. Do all panelists review all applications? I said that approximately 5 to 7 panelists review each application, and no, all panelists do not review all applications. Applications are randomly separated into groups of about 25 to 30. Would you add to that or change anything?
I completely agree with that answer.
All right. Let's see. Another question from the chat. Is the overall philosophy of this grant similar to the Artist Initiative grant in that its purpose is to advance the career of an artist, or similar to the Next Step? Or is it more project-based, community-based, similar to the arts activities, or is this some combination of the two? I'm asking because I may relate to how it may relate to how writing/project is framed.
Javon, I think I might ask for your assistance with this answer. I'm going to be honest and say I don't know a lot about the Artist Initiative grant, so I can't answer that part of the question. I'm sorry. As far as Next Step funds, I find this to be a major difference. You may not. The Next Step fund is for artists.
Correct.
Right? Whereas this grant program is for individuals creating arts access or creative endeavors. So that means for this grant program, you do not need to identify as an artist to apply, whereas the Next Step, you have to.
Correct.
I would be curious for your additional thoughts on this question.
Yeah, I completely agree with what you've said about next step. Next step is specifically for career advancements of an artist and their artistic career. So this is not what this grant program does. But having applied in my non-Emrak life to the Arts Initiative grant, it is a little bit more similar to that grant, as there is that public component that is a requirement. So even if you are an artist who's applying for this grant program, whatever the outcome is, or whatever maybe your process is, it needs to be shared with the public in some way. The public should be able to engage with it in some way, but that is up to you. The way that they engage with it or experience it is up to you. So does that answer your question? Yeah, okay, good. Let's see, another question here. I think my last question shuffles out wrong. Can this individual grant budget have a line item to purchase that tax ID? I'm trying to scroll up to see if there's another part of this question. I don't see it.
I'm not sure if there's a cost associated with the tax ID, number one. And if it is completely necessary to and related to your program or project, and it follows on the incur after a certain day, potentially.
Right, and we're just getting confirmation from folks in the chat that that does not bear a cost. Getting your tax ID does not bear a cost. Business ID you spoke before, right? That is not an expense. But I would agree with what Masami said, that you can include anything that is related to the project as a project expense, but you would really need to be clear about how it is related to this artistic project. Any other questions? And there are additional comments and questions in here about taxes and registering businesses, which I, again, will defer to Springboard, and we are not qualified to answer these questions. But if there are any additional questions about this grant program or the application process, we'll take those. Otherwise, it's 1:30.
I appreciate everyone in the chat sharing this information amongst yourselves. Thank you.
So I think that's it on questions.
Thank you, interpreters, for being here today. Gratitude.